Hey guys, back for part 2 of our video on measurement. So again, we're doing chapter 5. So where I left you off last time was on how do we, so what are 3 of the issues of measurement that we have? Right, remember from last time we talked about measurement as trying to link a causal theory to a series of empirical metrics, right? And the issues that we have when we try to do that are the following 3. I mean, there are probably more than these, but like these are just the really important ones that we're going to be talking about. The first is conceptual clarity. Second is reliability, and the third is validity. Okay, so let's talk about what each of these mean in turn. So conceptual clarity is pretty much exactly what it says, right? What is the nature of the thing you're trying to measure? Is the concept clear? Okay, so like a concept might be something like income, right? You want to measure income. It seems like a pretty straightforward thing. Okay, but if you don't have a handle on what the income is, then you won't be able to get a good measure of it. Now, it sounds like income is a pretty straightforward thing, but it's really not in a way, because income can mean a lot of different things. Income can mean salary that you get from a regular job. Income can mean salary that you get from a non-regular job, right? There's all different types of income. Income could be money that you receive from the government in the form of payments, such as retirement payments, payments for like food stamps and stuff like that, okay? So the first thing you want to do, and the first problem that we have is kind of narrowing down the conceptual clarity, right? Narrowing down what it is that we're trying to measure. So in the example here, when a survey question is thinking about measuring income, you have to think, you have to design the question in a way that gets at exactly the right concept. So like if you ask the first question, what is income? What is your income? Then you're going to get all kinds of different answers, right? You're going to get people talking about, their social security payments, people talking about their payments for food stamps or whatever, and it's going to be a very wide variety of types of income. But you could be more precise about it, okay? And you might want to ask the question in the following way. What's the total amount of income earned in the most recently completed tax year by you and other adults in your household, including also all sorts of income? So this narrows it down to a very specific type of income that you could then use to compare people. And of course, the biggest problem of asking about income in the way in which the first question asks about it is that people can put their income over like 5 years, 10 years. They can, again, put all their different types of income that they have. And so you want to avoid kind of question number 1 where, you have a really vague question. And, you want to nail down that question very precisely. Because, what could happen, if you think about it, is that if you ask a broad question like, what is your income? You're going to get like different answers from different types of people, okay? So maybe people, here's like a weird example. Like maybe people who tend to be more conservative will say, their exact income in the last tax year. But maybe people who are more liberal or something like that will tend to say, like put down their income over the last 5 years or something. You don't know. Like there's lots of different measurement problems that can arise from just not specifying your question broadly. So you have to be very clear about the concept that you're specifying. Okay, so let's talk now about reliability. Reliability is probably one of the easiest things to understand. Like when you say someone's reliable, right? What does that mean? Like if I say if you knew Jason, Professor Anastasopoulos is a reliable person, what does that mean? Well, that means that whenever they say they're going to do something, they kind of come through on it, right? Their actions are concurrent or concordant with the things that they say, right? And so, like, if you ask me to do something and I say yes, then that thing gets done. So it's consistent, consistent actions that are. It's basically that there's a consistency between the things that you say and the actions that you do. Okay, that's what reliability is. In measurement, reliability is the exact same thing. Okay. A reliable instrument or a reliable means of measuring an independent or a dependent variable is one in which if you were to measure that concept over and over again using the same instrument, you're going to get the same answer, or an answer that's really close to it. Okay, so I put the bathroom scale as an ideal, as an illustration of that. So let's take, like with the bathroom scale, okay, it seems like, again, like an obvious kind of example, but you have a bathroom scale, and a bathroom scale, most bathroom scales are incredibly reliable, right? So if you get on the scale and you weigh something like 200 pounds or something like that, right? And then you step off the scale, you get on the scale again, and then you see that you weigh 210 pounds. And then you get off the scale, and then you get on the scale again, and then you see you weigh 190 pounds. Okay, that's a scale that's not reliable. That's a scale that has, in which there's severe measurement problems of reliability. Because the scale is not measuring the same concept, is not giving you the same measure, right, when you administer the instrument to the exact same person. That's a big problem with reliability. And we don't want that in our bathroom scales, right? We want or any scale. We want our scale to, give us the correct answer in a consistent manner. So if my scale, when I got on my scale, it said 200 pounds, and then a minute later I got on it again, it said 200 pounds, and then again 200 pounds, right? That's a scale that's very reliable, right? That's an instrument, the scale, that's measuring something, my weight, which is very reliable. Another example of a reliable instrument is something that you guys might be familiar with, and that is the LSAT exam. So the LSAT exam it's used, the LSATs and SATs, they're used because they're very reliable. So when you take the LSAT, you get a certain score, and you retake it, and then you get a certain score, and you retake it, and so on and so forth, right? And you get a certain score. That's called a reliable instrument, because the scores that you will get, like say if you retook the LSAT 80 to 100 times over the course of each day, the scores that you would get would be pretty close together. Okay, so it has like something called test-retest reliability. So the scale is a reliable instrument. The LSAT is a reliable instrument in the sense that when you take the measure over and over again, when you take the test over and over again, you get a score that's basically pretty consistent. So people who are scoring like 180, if they take the test again, they're probably not going to score like 150. People who score 150, I'm using the old LSAT measures because I have no idea what the scale is now. People who score like 150, if they took a test 1,000 times, they're probably not going to score 180 or 170, right? Which was the top score at the time that I remember the LSAT, doing the LSAT. So that's reliability, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about validity. And validity is a little bit different than reliability, and because it's not really a concept that discusses whether an instrument itself or a measure is going to be the same if you repeat it. Okay, validity really gets to the core of the problem of measurement, and that is the question of whether the thing that you're using to measure that abstract concept. Remember, going back to here, right? Whether the operationalization of the independent variable and the dependent variable, whether that thing, validity basically tells you whether that thing is in fact doing this in a realistic way, right? So is the independent variable metric that you chose accurately portraying the independent variable concept that you chose? Is the dependent variable measure that you chose accurately portraying the dependent variable concept that you want to get to, right? So, and we have different types of reliability. Of validity. So, and which I'll talk about in a second. But let's just kind of make this concept a little bit clearer, right? So, a good example of a problem with validity is when you try to go out and you try to measure something like prejudice in hiring decisions. So this is actually a very difficult thing. This is actually a very difficult thing to do. Okay, so what is it that you want to measure when you want to measure prejudice? Well, okay, let's actually go through this in another time. All right, so there are three types of validity. Okay, there's something called face validity, which is informal, and the question that you have to ask yourself there is, does a measure subjectively capture the concept that it's supposed to? Right? There's something called content validity, which is, does a measure capture all the aspects of the concept? Right? So does the measure capture every single aspect of the concept that you want to study? And then there's construct validity, which is the degree to which the measure captures what it claims to measure. So face validity basically and construct validity are kind of similar, except that with construct validity you're talking about the degree to which the measure captures the concept that you want to measure. All right, we're going to go through an example of this to make this clear. So that's going to be in the next video. But it's important to know that there's actually a pretty strong relationship between validity and reliability. Okay, so the first thing that you have to have for any study to be valid or for any study to be reasonable, is that your instrument, the measure that you're using, the operationalization. I'm using all these words interchangeably because they really mean the same thing. The measurement has to be reliable in some way. Okay, so if you have some kind of measure which is not reliable, you can pretty much just throw that out the window off the bat. That's not a good measure. Okay, so you're going to want to get rid of that right off the bat. If your measure is reliable, right? So if we were going down this tree, right? So if you say no, right, the measure is unreliable, we just kind of throw it away. We have to start from scratch because it's going to be garbage, right? If the measure is reliable, then we have to think about, well, whether it's valid. Okay, is the measure capturing something on a consistent basis? That's yes. Okay, so that's yes for reliability. Then is the measure measuring what we want to measure, right? And that's where validity comes in. If it's no, that means that, well, we can't really, if we're not actually measuring the concept that we want to measure, even though we're doing it reliably, then we would want to just throw that away, right? I mean, here's an example of like the LSAT, right? Let's take the LSAT again. So is the LSAT a reliable measure? Yes, right? It measures something, okay, in a consistent fashion. In that, when people take it over again, they basically get the same score, roughly the same score, or a similar score. Now, the question of validity is a little bit different, right? Is the LSAT a valid measure? Well, what does a valid measure mean? Well, okay, what's the point of the LSAT? The point of the LSAT is, according to the LSAC group that puts out the test, it's supposed to measure your ability and your performance as a lawyer, right? It's supposed to measure how you're going to perform in law school. Okay, so the LSAT can be a reliable measure of something, but if it doesn't measure how you perform in law school on a consistent basis, then it would be an invalid measure. So it would be a reliable but invalid measure, right? On the other hand, if the LSAT measures some concept in a reliable way, in other words, again, each time you test, you basically get the same score or similar score, and it also measures the extent to which you perform well in law school. So if you see a high correlation between people who score high on the LSAT and who get above a 3.5 GPA or whatever, or that we just look at their GPA and we correlate it with their LSAT, and we get a kind of nice looking plot, then that would actually make the LSAT a reliable measure. I'm sorry, a valid measure. And that's what we're shooting for. We want a measure to be reliable and valid. And we could kind of look, we could take a look at the correlation between LSAT and law school GPA to get a sense of whether, in fact, LSAT is, in fact, a reliable measure. All right? So let's take a look at, let's take one of these plots here. Let's take this one. Okay, so this is a correlation between people's LSAT scores and their law school GPA. Okay. So what are we seeing here? Well, each of the observations, the dots are a person, and on the x-axis here we have the LSAT score, and on the y-axis we have people's law school GPA, right? So what do we see here? Well, this looks like there's some evidence for validity here, right? There's a correlation of 0.45. We'll talk about correlation later. And it does seem as if, on average, as LSAT score increases, GPA tends to increase as well. But there's also, it's not kind of a slam dunk case for validity, right? At least this plot doesn't provide that, in my opinion. Okay, because we have lots of people who are scoring like pretty high. We have lots of people who are scoring low in the LSAT and doing pretty well in law school. So like that would be this group of people here. We have lots of people who are scoring pretty high on the LSAT, but they're doing pretty crappy in law school. And that would be like those folks here. So from this we would basically say LSAT is a valid measure, but it may not necessarily be. It's not like really a slam dunk case for validity and reliability. Certainly a reliable measure, right? Because again, when people retake the LSAT, they always pretty much get the same score, but it's not necessarily it's also a valid measure to some extent, but the case for validity, I think, is not as strong as people might think it is as a measure of law school performance. And hey, I think that might be part of the reason why law schools are willing to accept GREs as opposed to LSATs if people choose to use GREs. So just something to consider. Okay. So in the next section, I'm gonna talk about I'm gonna talk about an example that we have discussing problems with reliability and validity, and we'll kind of take it from there. And so that's going to be in the next video.